Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bible Discoveries, the weekend show. My name is Corie, and I'm here with my husband, Matlock. Hey, Matlock.
What is going on?
Well, we're reading through the Bible.
We are.
And we're in the Gospels.
We are in the Gospels, Mark 1 to 14. And yeah, if you've been reading with us this week, that's great. If you haven't, I encourage you to do so. We read through the Bible in 1 year. And if you want to participate in that, that'd be fantastic. We're starting again in January, Genesis 1, and we go through the whole Bible. And on this weekend show, we just answer the questions throughout the week. So if you had any questions pertaining to Mark 1 to 14, that's what we're dealing with today. Corie, what do you think?
Exactly. All right. Why don't we just jump right in? Because we do have a viewer question pertaining to, really the beginning of Mark. So This is from Toby Guile 3411.
All right.
And he says, "Hi guys, I have a question for you. We know that sin and death came into the world as a result of the fall, that we were born with sin under the curse. I was wondering about Jesus and his 40 days of fasting. Since Jesus was born without sin, not under any curse, then would death have no claim on him? If so, he could have fasted a year and still not died. Jesus did say, 'No man takes my life, but I have authority to lay it down and pick it up again.' I think that makes sense that without sin in his life, he couldn't die. Just to be clear, I know he was truly man and truly God. I know he was tempted in all ways and suffered as we do. I'm sure after 40 days of fasting, he was definitely very hungry and suffering, but I don't think he could have died from it. What do you guys think of that? It wouldn't change anything about salvation or the gospel, but it's just a thought."
All right. Fun topic to discuss. Okay. So one, I think that there's two options here. Either Christ doesn't die and he continues on living forever, which then would bring into question his fully humanness. Now, people would say, well, he's fully human regarding like Adam and Eve were. But Adam and Eve were not fully immortal in and of themselves. They required the fruit. That's the reason why the angel the cherubim was protecting the fruit. So when they were casted out, if they ate of the fruit, they would live forever, God said. But he cast them out. So it wasn't that immortality was inherent to humans. It was given through the fruit, which is a symbol for greater things. Anyways, besides that, though, I think that there's something to be said about Christ being a fully human who would then live on. He's aged. Of course, he was a child, and he would just keep aging, die natural death. And in that natural death, let's say he was an old man, okay? In that natural death, still conquer death, right? To redeem us from our sins and raise from the dead and ascended to heaven. So I think that the plan was to redeem us from death, and that regardless of the crucifixion, that plan is still going to happen. And throughout, if you read some of the, like in church history, a large part, the reason why being fully human is so important is because that's what Christ is redeeming us from. He needs to be fully enveloped in the human condition to redeem us. So if there's something about him that's not human, then that part wouldn't be redeemed. So that's the principle. So
he inherited his physical body from Mary,
right?
Who was a full human, right? So he inherited everything from her. And if she didn't nurse him as an infant, he would have died.
Right.
Him coming as there's so much theology and like a study of God and that comes from that, the concept that he came as the most vulnerable. He couldn't survive himself, but he was dependent on a woman for survival. This is God incarnate. He inherited the physical body and the physical condition from his mother, Mary, who was fully human. So he was fully human and fully God in all that contained. I think a hint that we get here, even in Mark 1, when it says that Jesus was being tempted in the wilderness for 40 days, in verse 13, it says, being tempted by Satan, and he was with the wild animals, and the angels were ministering to him. So he was being supernaturally kept alive. He was being supernaturally carried along in the wilderness, which implies that without that, he would have died.
Right.
And we see in the Old Testament other cases of angels coming and ministering to people, ministering to Hagar and Ishmael, ministering to Elijah, ministering, like there's even hints of this in Mark 1 that, yeah, it's unusual to be able to fast and live for 40 days, but it's something that can happen with God's help.
Right. And yeah, I think what's interesting about the question itself too is it actually helps you think about like why Christ came in the first place. Like Christ came to die, which is a really weird idea, but came to conquer death specifically. So Christ's death is necessary to redeem us from death. So if Christ came to earth and chose never to die, we would die and not be redeemed from our sins. I'm not trying to laugh about that, but the point is that it would create a theological error along the way because Christ did not redeem the human condition yet. He didn't experience the whole human condition. Death is a part of the human condition.
And I think the reason why he can say, no man takes my life from me, but I lay down my life, is because he knew that he was born for a specific purpose. And the Old Testament teaches that even just among regular people, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. I believe that's Isaiah chapter 52.
Right.
So God is sovereign, and Jesus knew why he was born. And he knew that God's plan would happen. And we see Jesus altering his life because of this and altering his choices because of this. Like, he slips away in the crowd unnoticed multiple times when they're trying to kill him, when they pick up stones to stone him, right? He slips away. Well, because it's not his time to die. And so the intimation is that he could have died. He could have been murdered, but he was not going to let it happen at that time because his time had not yet come. There was a plan afoot. So I think we've got to be careful with mistaking like Jesus as this Superman, something a little bit more than human, where the Bible is clear. No, he's physically fully human, but spiritually also fully God. So like we've got this we have to be careful not to make him like a Superman.
Yes.
Like he was a carpenter. I'm sure he cut himself many a time on the stones of ancient Israel and, and got things stuck in his eye and got aches and pains as he hit his 30s, right? There's all those memes on the internet now.
Right.
I'm 30, using a different pillow hurts my body. I'm sure he experienced those things. And the reason why Christ is living eternally now is because he was glorified, right? Even when he meets Mary Magdalene in the garden, he says, don't hold on to me before I haven't gone back to my Father yet. I have to be glorified, right? So yes, he still carries the scars on his physical body, but he is eternal now, because he was glorified by the Father.
So yeah, what's really interesting too is that so because Jesus could have died a natural death, it really brings into the limelight how depraved we are.
Yeah. Because
he was a sinless man, did nothing wrong, and yet we killed him, right? And as if he was the worst. So it really emphasizes the fact that we need redemption because we're so depraved. Anyway, so I think that's really interesting in itself. And I understand the desire, though, to the difficulty that Toby Gile has here, because what he sees is, he was sinless, so he can't die. That's the curse. The curse is not death.
No, but I don't think physical death came about. We don't earn physical death. We earn spiritual death. I'm trying to find a way to articulate this because you brought it up earlier. Yeah. Like Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden so that they wouldn't live forever.
Yes.
Because their access to the tree of life is apparently what was keeping them alive, like eternally alive, right? Because God literally says, lest they eat from the tree of life and live forever. So they were gonna die unless they ate from the tree of life.
That's right.
So an inherent part of the human condition is death unless you're sustained by God.
That's right. And Christ came to die, to do the whole human condition,
Yes.
Right. So, and that's the whole point. So, because why?
It's an
Because God
interesting
can't
thought
die. So God
process.
goes, right, exactly. It's good to do because
It is. It's very
it empowers
cool.
your Christological understanding of what's happening.
But Christ had to be, and this is a part of Christian theology, is that Christ, and I know Toby agrees with this because he talks about Jesus being fully man and fully God, but I think death is inherently a part of that. He had to be a true son of Adam and Eve for his sacrifice to mean anything, for it to take effect.
That's right. So interesting. So could he have? I guess suppose he did not have to die if he didn't want to, but he wanted to, is the point.
It was like his purpose.
That's his purpose, right?
It was his purpose. But I think the potential for death was always there.
Yes,
like
it's humans. Yes,
he's human.
That's the point.
We can die. We're fragile. We're
Right,
mortal.
Corie.
Okay, Matlock, another question for you from Mark 9. Okay, this is from Jerry Day AO 8924. And they say, I was hoping to hear some answers to the following. 1, why did Jesus need to transfigure when the 3 with him already knew above the rest that he was the Son of God? 2, why is it important to point out that they went to the place after 6 days? Okay,
so to answer the first question, I don't think it's theologically important to point out that after 6 days, right, Jesus took them to the mountain. I don't think the 6 days is theologically important. I think it's just a fact. I think like, hey, after 6 days, we went here. And I think that this is kind of the point behind, like, you have actual eyewitness writers who were there just documenting what they remember and what they saw. So I think it's just a testimony to that, again, in a very subtle testimony, you could say. But I don't think it has any theological significance, the 6 days aspect, unless you know of something that I'm not aware about.
Here, no. Other places, yes. So here, it just seems to be part of the eyewitness account. Right. But like, for example, when you get into the book of John, and John says, on the great day of the festival, and then 3 days later, this is what Jesus said. What he's saying is that on certain days of the festival, Jesus said certain theological truths that when you look at those days of the festival, line up. Right. So sometimes these things are important.
Fair enough.
And sometimes I think they are just, well, I mean, what if you're Mark writing this from Peter's memory, and Peter's like, well, then 6 days later, he took us here. You're not going to be like, then they went here, because you know that it was 6 days later. So why not write it?
Yeah, and then you could be like, well, is it possible that when Barnabas said it after 6,000 years, like the new heavens and new earth would come?
Right.
And then you tie in this idea, like, yeah, sure, we can have those things. So 6 days like 1,000 years like a day. We can have those parallels, and I'm fine with that. I'm just not going to be like, this is exactly what this means. But yeah, I think it's possible to have those prophetic allusions like integrated into the text that are very subtle. And then when you read it again, you're like, what about that and that? It's like, possibly. Anyways, but yeah, I personally, I don't know too much about that. Anyways, we'll continue. Second part of the question, the first question actually. Why did Jesus need to transfigure when the 3 with him already knew above the rest that he was the Son of God? Okay, well, they knew, but again, when Jesus transfigures here, now this is chapter 9, verses 1 or 2 to 10. Peter says, when he sees Elijah and Moses beside him, he goes, Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Okay, so like, despite what they know, they don't really know, if that makes sense. Like, now they really get it, is what I'm saying. It's that like experience brings about something that your rationale, they get it in principle, but they haven't quite lived it yet. And so he's giving them a little taste of what, glorification and these things mean, a little taste. And they're terrified because of it. So they don't really know is the point. Otherwise, if you really know, like if you know how to go to the washroom, like that's a bad example. If you know how to do something, right? Like play hockey or play sports, play chess, you're not like blown away by the first time you see someone teaching you how to do it. You just, I know that. It's very neutral, right? You just know, hey, a pawn moves 2 spaces on its first move. You're not like, oh, yeah. You're not blown away. It's just, it is what it is. Anyways, in this case, they're blown away emotionally. So I would say they knew better now. They're given like a physical testimony here. Think about the mercy of that. Yes. Sure. Peter said, you're the Son of God. But God does this in lesser extents to all of us, where he will
blow us away with something that he does in our life. He gives us testimonies. He gives us examples of him working in our lives so that later on, when we need to be sustained, when we're facing a really brutal time in our lives, it's like we can jive with the tribulation saints in Revelation who overcame them by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, right? Like testimonies can sustain us through times of doubt and struggle. And all of these men are going to go through their own struggles. Peter's going to be martyred. John's going to live a long life. James is going to be martyred. And to me, it just strikes of God's mercy. We're like, did he have to show them this? No. But it added to their assurance that Jesus was who he said he was.
Right.
And it did add to their theology as well, because it shows that Jesus does not conflict with the Old Testament, of which Moses and Elijah represent. Moses represents the law, and Elijah represents the prophets. So the New Testament, Jesus jives with the law and the prophets. So it adds to their theology.
Right.
And it gives them this incredible testimony that I imagine would be quite sustaining through difficulty.
Yeah.
Like, I know this is just Christian tradition and it's loose Christian tradition,
Sure.
but there is a Christian tradition, so it doesn't have a lot of proof to back it up, but it's been passed along throughout the ages, so do with it what you will, that Peter's wife, because she was martyred at the same time as him, according to Christian tradition, that Peter's wife, as she was being dragged out to be martyred, according to this tradition, she was torn apart by wild beasts. As she was passing Peter, she said, "Remember the Lord."
Mm.
Sustaining.
Yeah.
Our testimonies sustain us, regardless of whether that tradition is factually true. It speaks to the millennia of Christian experience that we are standing upon the shoulders of. It's a timeless truth that the truths that God explains to us through our lives has an incredibly sustaining effect through difficulty and times of trouble.
Right. No, I agree with you. And part of this too is, what is the result of this transfiguration? Well, after the vision happens, where are we? Verse 10, they kept to themselves questioning what was so Jesus says, after they're coming down the mountain, he charged them to tell no one what they had seen till the Son of Man had risen from the dead. And so they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what the rising from the dead might mean. So even though they saw Moses and Elijah, they're like, what was that? They're like, okay, well, they're dead. And so they're like, what does this all mean? Then all of a sudden they're building their theology, right? Like they're trying to figure out what's happening at this very moment. But also to remember that Peter denies Christ even after seeing the transfiguration, right? So despite having that knowledge and that experience, right, it's not like a complete basis for which you go about things, but it does change you dramatically. And like you said, it's a mercy, because then Peter can look back at that moment after denying Christ and realize he's a fool, right? So these things happen, and he gave it to the three, right? His closest three disciples, which tells you something else about, you have his 12 apostles, but then there's the inner three, right? That are more intimate with Christ than others are. And then there's the outer 70, right? And then it keeps going. So it tells you something else that's there. So I don't think, again, that Corie, you're nailed on spot on, that Christ didn't need to do this, but he wanted to. And I think with that, Corie, we can move on to the next question regarding Mark 10.
Okay, Mark 10.
Okay, this is from Bill 88694. Okay, and it says, thank you, Corie and Matlock. The analogy that Corie made regarding regarding good and bad figs in ancient times would be the same as comparing good and bad strawberries today. Jesus also kept saying to have faith. Anything is possible, like referring to moving mountains or elephant going through the eye of a needle. Question: what was the context that Jesus was talking about with the needle analogy? What would be a comparison in today's world?
Okay. Yeah, so I think it's really, really interesting. This teaching about a camel needing to go through the eye of a needle is said in the context of wealth. So this concept that about how difficult it is for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven, and Jesus's analogy means it's impossible. So it literally is just, I know people talk about there a gate in Jerusalem and a camel had to go down on its knees. And regardless of all of that, which may or may not be accurate, if you just take it on face value, Jesus does not mean it's a very difficult thing for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. He means it's impossible. And we know that because he literally says this. He goes, "Children, how difficult it is to enter the kingdom of God. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God." And they were exceedingly astonished and said to him, "Then who can be saved?" And Jesus looked at them and said, "With man, it is impossible, but not with God. For all things are possible with God." So Jesus's point of the needle, so the eye of the needle is just the part where the thread goes through. Like trying to fit a camel through there. Thread is hard enough. I know needles were a little bit bigger in the ancient world, but not enough where it's going to be hard to get a thread through there. It's still going to be hard, right? So, but putting a camel through there, I mean, unless you
quite the meat grinder
have a really big meat grinder. I mean, the camel's not going to make it alive to the other side of the eye of the needle, right? And Jesus' point is that it's impossible. It's an impossible thing to do, which would have been quite shocking for the people of Jesus' time, not only because the rich young ruler was there and he was like, "I followed all the rules, all of the Mosaic law. It's just this one, the selling of my goods to the poor and following Jesus with everything that I have," that like he has trouble with. But beyond that, the Sadducees who maintained the temple of Jerusalem, where worship of God was centered, where rabbis went to be taught the word of God, they were very wealthy. Not the Pharisees, but like the Sadducees, the people who controlled this thing. So this concept that it's impossible with man, like your riches don't get you far. In fact, they hurt you. And I mean, all sorts has been taught on this, like the concept being that when we trust ourselves, when we trust our riches, when we trust our government, when we trust our legal system, when we trust our families, when we trust our insert anything that we tend to trust, doctors, oils, homeopathy, when we trust all of these things, but don't have to depend on God, we develop a weird relationship with these things and with God, because we should see God as our ultimate source of all things. And then all of these things are tools that God can use to help us. But God is our ultimate source of life and comfort and truth and all of these things. And so, yeah. So I can't think of a better analogy here. Like, I think that's pretty good. I think a camel going through the eye, because it's impossible.
Right.
I mean, what are other impossible things?
No, I think just in general too, just to add other context, he's asking for context for it. So in this situation here with the rich young man, if you think about wealthy people, it's easier for them. Their life is much more cozy. It's easier for them to do things. Like it's even easier for them to set aside time to help the poor because they have the money to be like, okay, I'm not going to work this week because I'm going to do this. So life itself is just easier for these people. So I think even just perceptively, you could be like, oh, okay, well they can sin less because they're not involved in like, other things, but it's all facade. But I wanted to add context to this specifically. So the reason why Jesus says to the rich young ruler, sell all your possessions and follow me. He wasn't adding something new that this rich young ruler wouldn't understand. And that's what's important, because the word there, when Jesus says to get for eternal life, you need to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. That word strength there doesn't mean your inner strength, and it can imply it, but it's more so about your resources, your external strength, like how much money you have, how much wealth you have, all your assets. So when he's talking to the rich young ruler here, he's like, it would actually be loving the Lord your God with all your strength, is what he's charging him on. Hey, yeah, you followed all these rules, great, but do you love the Lord your God with all your strength? And the rich young ruler, by selling all your assets and devoting your life to, right? The rich young ruler didn't meet the standard. So that's what I think is really interesting. So regardless of the wealth situation, regardless of his wealth and all these different things that he has, Jesus then boils it down to, well, it's impossible for man. You can't just rely on wealth, like you were saying, Corie, to get in. You can't rely on it, right? It's only through God. So yeah, rich men can get into heaven, but it's not because of their wealth that makes their lives easier.
It's because of God.
It's because of God.
And dependency on God.
That's all it is.
Same way that poor people get there.
Right.
Same way.
Right. And I just think it's interesting that Christ wasn't saying something that he wouldn't, I think, understand is the point. Like, he understood the principle, loving God with all your strength, therefore means all your assets. And it's inclusive of that, is what I'm saying. So therefore, he got him. Like, right?
Yeah.
And so anyways, it's just interesting. It's just interesting to point out.
And people have noted, in terms of like coming up with another analogy, take where you live specifically, and think of the largest animal in your area. Because the largest animal in Israel was the camel. It's the large.
They didn't have huge. They're bigger than horses.
They're large. The largest animal is the camel. Then think of the smallest opening that you have in your house, which I think in our house is still a sewing needle. I have some very fine sewing needles. I feel like that. We live in Canada, in Ontario specifically. I think the largest animal here would be a moose.
Yes.
We have very large moose up north, not exactly where we live, but in the same area where we live.
And you still think it's the eye of a needle, still the smallest?
Because the concept is like Jesus took the largest animal in that area and the smallest opening that would be like a common everyday item, and was like, now make the largest thing pass through the smallest thing. It's impossible. You can't do it.
But I can do it.
But I can do it.
Right.
I can do it.
That's good, Corie. I'm going to change that to moose forever.
Moose.
All right. Last question, Corie. It's regarding Isaiah 11 and Mark 13. Okay. It's from Jolly Jester 39:23. He asks a question. So when will this happen? The wolf will live with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear. Their young will lie down together. And the lion will eat straw like the ox. Isaiah 11, 6-7.
Right. Okay. So I will tell you what I personally believe, and then I will add a caveat to it. So my personal belief is that this will happen in the new heavens and the new earth. So not even Messianic kingdom, because I think the picture of, I do personally believe that Jesus Christ will come and have a physically reigning Messianic kingdom. But death still happens, like birth and death and life still happens as is usual. It appears in the physical, like earthly Messianic kingdom of Christ, if that does indeed happen. Jesus Christ will physically return, but I mean, there's debate over the millennial reign. And so it seems like life as per usual. And then when the new heavens and the new earth comes, that's when every tear is wiped away and death is no more and the sea is no more and God is the source of light. So that's when I would place this. However, there is an interpretation of Isaiah 11 where this is meant to be metaphoric, meaning that it represents death being gone, strife being gone, danger being gone, this time of ultimate peace. So there are some people who would say, well, this isn't talking about like a literal lion, a literal lamb, a literal adder. It's actually talking about the concepts behind those things.
Right.
So that would be the caveat. So that's where I would place it. I would place it new heavens, new earth. But I know that some people interpret it as, again, new heavens, new earth, but it's more conceptual. It's more peace. And when it is conceptual and peace and more about just peace, you could place it then in the Messianic kingdom, like Jesus Christ here on earth reigning for 1,000-ish years.
Right. Because then you have here in verse 9, they shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain.
Yes.
For the earth shall be full of knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea.
See, and that seems like new heavens, new earth to me.
Yeah, right. And when you have this, if it's new heavens, new earth, then it can be both literal and metaphoric, like you're saying.
Absolutely.
If you just take a metaphor, which you constantly have, and it's what people I think often forget when they get really caught up in these things. You often have double entendres. Like this whole book is full of double entendres, where it's like, oh, it actually has a metaphorical meaning or a half fulfilled prophecy, let's say, and that has a completion point. And usually those half-fulfilled ones or those are more metaphorical. And I don't like to use the word metaphor. I don't like, anyways, there's better words for that, but it's more symbolic. So anyways, the point here is to be said is that, yes, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb. Why? Because wolves eat the lamb. But these wolves were typically, they're going to be redeemed is the idea. So the leopard shall lie down with the young goat. It's the idea is all these things that were predatory and prey will now get together. So the evil will be conquered.
Yes.
Right.
So that metaphorical interpretation is valid and could be applied to the time of Christ's physical return.
Right.
When he deals with evil, when he deals with predators of his people, right? Like the enemies of his people.
False. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But in terms of like, if there is an actual physical reign of Christ on earth before the new heavens and the new earth, which I think there probably will be, but if there is that, it does appear like life as usual is going on, though enemies have been dealt with, there does seem to still be births and deaths.
Maybe, because Isaiah 65 talks about that, but we really don't know.
I know. It's all hypothetical. But then I would say, like, in the Messianic reign, this definitely applies metaphorically.
Yes.
In the new heavens and the new earth, I would say
it can apply literally. It
applies both
ways,
physically and metaphorically.
Yeah, and absolutely, because I think that there will be animals in heaven. I like it that new heavens, new earth. I think there will be animals.
It would make sense of this whole paradise in the Garden of Eden lost, paradise redeemed in the new heavens and the new earth.
Because it's always about redemption.
It makes sense.
I know. It's always about reconciling and redemption. That's the path. Like, otherwise, it's like, why not start from scratch? Always start over. It's like, no, he's always trying to redeem what was made because what he made was good.
Yeah.
So I think that just makes sense. Anyways.
That's all I got. That's all I got on that. Because I can't just be like, here's how it's going to be, which I know Jolly Jester doesn't want me to do either. Just wanted to hear my opinion. I want to hear your opinion, Jolly Jester. When do you think this applies to? Do you think it's metaphorical? Do you think it's metaphorical and actual? What do you think? Let me know. What does everyone else think? Let us know how you would have answered some of these questions down in the comment section down below. If you have questions for the rest of the New Testament and even moving into the Old Testament, because we're going to be taping ahead so that I can go on a little bit of a maternity leave with this little Bubba who's coming soon. So that would be really helpful because we're going to tape ahead so that we don't miss any weekend show episodes with you. I think that's it. Oh, subscribe. If you're still listening and you haven't already subscribed, please don't forget to give it a like, give it a share, send it to someone who you think would enjoy this format of a show. But until next time, happy reading and studying.